I waited 7 years for a man who was never coming back. While I was raising our 3 children alone, cooking, sacrificing, explaining to everyone around me that my husband was working on the West Coast, he was building a completely different life in Los Angeles with another woman in another home, as if he had never existed. But the worst part was not the abandonment. The worst part was that I defended him for years to our children, to his own mother, to everyone who asked. I protected a man who had already forgotten me, and I only discovered the truth because a stranger, a woman I had never met, a woman he had also deceived, decided that I deserved to know. That one phone call destroyed everything I believed about my marriage. But what happened after? What I did with that truth? How my children survived it? And what occurred the day he showed up back at my door, broken and with nowhere to go? That is the part that will stay with you. Because this is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about what a woman finds inside herself when everything she built her life around turns out to have been a lie. My name is Claire, and this is what really happened. There are moments in life that do not announce themselves. They do not come with thunder or warning. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary evenings, as routine phone calls, as the silence between words spoken by someone you trusted with everything you had. And when they finally break you open, you realize the wound was never made in that single moment. It had been made slowly over years, in 1,000 small ways you refuse to see. I am going to tell you something I have never told anyone in full. Not my mother, not my sisters, not the neighbors who watched me raise 3 children alone, while smiling through a pain so deep it became part of my breathing. I am going to tell you the truth about 7 years of my life. What it means to wait for someone who was never coming back, and what it costs a woman to finally understand that. Because if even one person hears this and recognizes their own silence in my story, then everything I am about to share will have been worth it. When my husband Marcus left for Los Angeles, our youngest child was only 3 years old. I remember the morning he left as clearly as I remember my own name. He wore a blue shirt. He smelled of the same cologne he had used since we were first married. He kissed each of our 3 children on the forehead, and when he turned to me, his eyes were full, not empty, full. I have replayed that image 10,000 times since then, searching for a lie in his expression, and even now I cannot find one. Either he was a man who truly believed in that moment that he would return, or he was a man so skilled at deceit that he had learned to deceive himself first. He held my face in both his hands and said, "Claire, this is for us. Everything I am doing is for us." And I believed him. God help me, I believed him completely. The first few months were almost bearable because of the calls. Every night, without exception, his name would light up my phone screen, and I would answer before the second ring. He told me about California in ways that made me laugh. He had never lived on the West Coast before, and his descriptions of the traffic, the weather, the people were so dramatic and so vivid that even our oldest, who was 9 at the time, would press her ear to the phone to listen. He told me he missed my cooking. He told me he missed the sound of our street in Columbus in the evenings. He told me he missed me. Those phone calls were my architecture. They were the structure that held everything together. I built our daily life around them. Dinner would be finished, children would be bathed, homework would be done, and then we would all wait for the phone to ring. It was almost like having him at the table with us. Almost. I want you to understand what my life looked like during those years, because it is easy to hear a story like this and forget that behind the betrayal, behind the drama that comes later, there was simply a woman doing what women have done for generations. I woke every morning before 5. I made breakfast for 3 children with 3 different preferences and 3 different school schedules. I managed the household budget on the money Marcus sent, which was never quite enough, but which I stretched in ways that would have impressed an accountant. I attended every parent meeting, every school function, every small ceremony that marked the growing up of my children, always alone, always explaining to teachers and other parents with a practiced smile that my husband was working on the West Coast. Working on the West Coast. Those 4 words became a kind of shield I carried everywhere. When relatives asked why he had not come home for Thanksgiving, I said, "He is working on the West Coast." When Helen, his mother, who lived 2 streets from us and whom I visited every week out of both love and duty, asked why her son had not called her in 3 weeks, I covered for him. I made excuses I did not even understand. I protected a man who was not there to be protected, and I did it because the alternative, admitting that something was wrong, felt more dangerous than the lie. It was in the 2nd year that the calls began to change. Not dramatically. That is what I need you to understand. There was no single evening where I looked at my phone and thought, something is different. The change came the way water changes temperature, so gradually that your body adjusts before your mind notices. The calls moved from every night to every other night, then to twice a week, then to whenever he had time, which was a phrase I accepted without question, because I had already learned to ask for very little. The conversations changed too, where before he would ask about each child by name. How did Sophia do on her test? Did Ethan eat properly today? Is Lily still afraid of the dark? The questions became general. How are the kids? Singular category. 3 individual human beings compressed into a single question that required a single answer. And then the conversation would move on to other things, to his work, to the city, to topics that had nothing to do with us. I noticed. I am telling you now that I noticed because I do not want you to think I was blind. I want you to understand the specific texture of choosing not to see something because seeing it would collapse the world you have built. I was not naive. I was afraid. There is a difference, and it matters. In the 3rd year, he stopped mentioning coming home. This happened so quietly that I cannot point to the exact conversation where it disappeared. But at some point, without announcement, all talk of timelines vanished. Where before he would say, maybe by Christmas next year, or I think by the end of this season I will have enough saved, there was suddenly only the present tense, only what was happening now, in his life, in that city, never what was coming, never when. I began asking directly. I would choose my moments carefully, a relaxed call, a good mood, a natural pause, and I would ask, as lightly as I could, Marcus, are you any closer to sorting things out? What is the situation with the transfer process for us? And he would sigh, not an angry sigh, a tired one, the sigh of a man who was being asked something inconvenient, something that required more energy than he had available. And he would say, Claire, these things take time. You don't understand how complicated it is out here. Please don't pressure me. So I stopped asking. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being a good wife, a supportive wife, the kind of wife who does not add to her husband's burden when he is already carrying so much. I told myself all of this while raising 3 children alone, while lying awake in a bed that had been half empty for years, while watching my oldest daughter grow from a 9-year-old girl who laughed at her father's descriptions of California into a 15-year-old young woman who had stopped asking when he was coming home because she had also noticed, and she had also made the choice in her own quiet way not to say it out loud. The call that changed everything came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The children had eaten. The house was clean. I had just sat down for the first time that day, truly sat down, with a cup of tea, with 5 minutes that belonged only to me, when my phone rang. His voice was different from the first word, not cold exactly, but distant in a way that had no geography. It was not the distance of a man calling from another city. It was the distance of a man who had already made a decision and was now simply delivering it. He said he needed to talk to me about something serious, and in the space of 4 sentences, in a voice that did not shake, he told me that he did not see himself returning to Columbus. He said his life was there now, in Los Angeles, and that coming back was not something he wanted. He said it might be many years before he could see the children in person. He said he would continue sending money. He said he was sorry. I did not speak for a long time. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the evening, a neighbor's television, a car passing on the street, the particular quality of an Ohio autumn evening that I had known my entire life. Everything exactly as it had always been. The world completely unchanged, and me sitting in the middle of it, holding a phone, realizing that the man I had been waiting for had already said goodbye. He had simply forgotten to tell me. I said, "All right." I do not know why I said that. Even now I do not fully understand it. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was a lifetime of learning to receive difficult things without falling apart in front of others, even when there was no one else in the room. Perhaps some part of me had known this moment was coming for so long that when it finally arrived, I had already used up all the words. I put down the phone. I finished my tea. I washed the cup. And then I went and checked on my children, who were sleeping peacefully in the next room, completely unaware that their father had just disappeared for the second time, this time with full intention. I did not cry that night. That surprised me. The tears would come later, and when they came, they would last for weeks. But that particular night, I sat in the darkness of my kitchen for a very long time, and what I felt was not grief exactly. It was something stranger and colder. It was the feeling of finally understanding something you had been refusing to understand. And the understanding was this: I had not lost my husband that Tuesday evening. I had lost him slowly over 3 years in 100 small surrenders. In every question I did not ask, in every excuse I chose to believe, in every night I pressed my ear to a phone call and told myself that the distance I heard in his voice was only distance, only miles, only the poor quality of a long-distance connection. I had been a widow to a living man, and I had not even known it. But what I did not know yet, what none of us know when we are sitting in our darkest moments, is that the story was not over, not even close. Because somewhere in Los Angeles, in a life I could not yet imagine, there was a woman who would one day pick up her phone and decide to tell me the truth. And everything I thought I understood about my marriage, about my years of waiting, about the man who had left us, All of it was about to become something far worse and far stranger than abandonment. There is a particular kind of pain that does not feel like pain at first. It feels like information, like a fact being handed to you across a table, clean and precise, and your mind receives it the way a mind receives facts, cataloging it, filing it, turning it over quietly. And then, some hours later, sometimes some days later, the fact becomes feeling, and the feeling becomes something you do not have a name for because no one ever prepared you for it. That is what it was like when the message arrived. It came on a night that was in every visible way identical to every other night of my life during that period. The children were asleep. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses become quiet after children have finally, after much negotiation, surrendered to sleep. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, not doing anything specific, not reading, not thinking about anything in particular, just existing in that hollow space between wakefulness and rest that had become my most honest state. My phone lit up, a name I did not recognize, a number I had never seen, a profile photograph that showed a woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, dark hair, standing somewhere that was clearly Los Angeles. The background was a rooftop bar, modern, the kind you see in California lifestyle magazines. She was smiling in the photograph, the smile of someone who, at the time that image was taken, had no idea that her life was about to become complicated in ways she could not have predicted. The message was short, only a few lines. She wrote carefully and formally, the way people write when they are trying to control something very difficult. She said her name was Diana. She said she was reaching out because she had recently discovered something that she believed I had the right to know. She said she had been in a relationship for over 2 years with a man named Marcus, and she had only just learned, through a chain of circumstances she would explain if I was willing to hear them, that he had a wife and children in Ohio. She said she was not writing to cause harm. She said she was writing because she herself had been deceived, and she did not believe any woman deserved to live inside a lie without knowing it was a lie. She asked if I was willing to speak with her. I read that message 4 times. Then I put the phone face down on the bed and sat very still for what must have been 10 or 15 minutes. My mind was doing something I can only describe as refusing. Not refusing to believe. That part happened almost immediately, with a speed that told me some portion of my consciousness had already known something like this was possible. What my mind was refusing was the full arrival of what it meant. 2 years, she had said, over 2 years. Marcus had ended our marriage, had told me on that ordinary Tuesday that he was not coming back, and at that point he had already been with this woman for more than 2 years. Which meant that while I was asking him careful questions about timelines, choosing my moments so as not to burden him, protecting his image in front of our children, his mother, our relatives, he had already built an entirely different life, a life that included another person, a life that looked from the outside like what our life was supposed to look like. I picked up the phone. I turned it back over. I read the message one more time, and then I replied. We spoke for nearly 3 hours that first night. Diana's voice was quieter than I expected. There was something in it, not guilt exactly, because she had done nothing wrong. She had not known. But a kind of careful sorrow, the sorrow of someone who was delivering news they wished they did not have to deliver. She spoke slowly, pausing often, as if she was always checking whether she had said too much, whether she needed to stop and ask how I was receiving what she was telling me. I appreciated that. I want to say that clearly. She told me how they had met, a gathering through mutual friends somewhere in the city. Marcus had told her from the very beginning that he was not married. He had told her he had come from Ohio alone, that he had left a difficult situation behind him, that he was building his life from scratch in California. He was, by her account, attentive and consistent in the early months. The same Marcus I had known, the same man who knew how to make a person feel chosen. They had moved in together after about 8 months. She said this carefully, watching the silence that followed on my end of the call. I said nothing, so she continued. They had shared an apartment in Silver Lake. They had built routines together. They had met each other's friends. From the outside, from the inside, she said, from where she was standing, it had looked and felt like a real partnership, like a future. She had started to discover the truth through something very small, a photograph. Not anything dramatic, not a hidden phone or an intercepted message. A photograph on a social media account that a mutual acquaintance had shared, showing Marcus at some family event years earlier. And in the photograph, there were children. And something about the way he stood in that image, something about the context, made her look more carefully. And looking more carefully led her to other things. And those other things led her eventually to me. When I found you, she said, I sat with it for 2 weeks before I decided to reach out. I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know what your situation was. I kept thinking, maybe it's not my place. Maybe this will only cause more pain. But then I thought, if I were you, would I want to know? She paused, and I decided that yes, I would want to know. I asked her questions I had no right to be surprised by my own need to ask. Did he ever speak about his children? She said, and this was the part that took longest to sit with, that he had mentioned once or twice that he had family in Ohio. He had described it as an old obligation, an arrangement from a previous chapter of his life. He had spoken about it, she said, in the way people speak about something that belongs to the past. Closed, resolved, an arrangement. I sat with that word for a very long time afterward. 3 children, 11 years of marriage, a woman who rearranged her entire existence around his absence, and it had been described to another person as an arrangement. I did not cry during that phone call. I was aware of this even as it was happening, this strange, dry clarity that had settled over me. Diana cried, not dramatically, but I heard it in her voice. The unsteadiness that comes from weeping quietly while still trying to speak. And I remember thinking even then that she had perhaps more room to cry than I did, because what she had lost was a relationship she had believed in. What I had lost was something harder to name, not a marriage that existed, but a marriage I had been maintaining alone in my head, in my daily choices, in every excuse I had made and every silence I had kept. You cannot grieve the loss of something you have been losing for years. By the time it is fully gone, you have already used up most of the grief. After we ended the call, I sat in my kitchen again, the same kitchen, the same darkness. But I want to tell you what was different this time compared to the night Marcus had told me he was not coming back. That night I had felt the cold recognition of something finally spoken. This night was different. This night I felt something I had not expected to feel. I felt anger. Not the hot, loud anger of immediate betrayal. Something deeper. Something that had been compressing inside me for years under the weight of patience and responsibility and the daily discipline of keeping 3 children's lives running smoothly. It rose now, slowly, like pressure beneath the ground, and it was enormous. I was angry at him for the obvious reasons: the deception, the other woman, the years of false cause and careful lies. But I was also angry at myself, and that was the harder anger to face. I was angry at every question I had swallowed, at every evening I had waited by the phone like a woman who had no value except to wait, at every relative I had defended him to, at every story I had told my children about why their father was not there. At every night I had laid in a bed that had been half empty for so long I had stopped noticing. I had participated in my own disappearance, not intentionally, not because I was foolish, but because I had been raised, as so many women are raised, to believe that holding everything together quietly was the most important thing I could do, that my steadiness was my virtue, that my patience was my love. No one had ever told me that sometimes steadiness is just another word for surrender. In the days that followed, I did not tell anyone what I knew, not my mother, not my sisters, not Helen, whom I continued to visit every week, sitting across from her and drinking coffee and listening to her speak about her son with a tenderness that now felt like a wound being pressed open each time. I kept the knowledge inside me, and I carried it the way you carry something very heavy, redistributing the weight constantly, finding new positions, never putting it down. My children watched me during this time, I think the way children always watch their mothers, with the particular attention of people who know that something is wrong, but have learned not to ask directly. My oldest daughter, who was 15 and had inherited, I am told, my own quality of observing more than she reveals, came and sat beside me one evening without explanation and put her head on my shoulder and stayed there for a long time without speaking. I did not speak either. I put my arm around her and we sat in the quiet together, and I thought about what it means to raise daughters in a world that will ask them too to be patient, to wait, to make themselves smaller so that someone else's life has more room. He said he was coming home. Not asking, not requesting permission or gauging my response before committing. He simply announced it in the way he had always announced things, as though the world would arrange itself accordingly. I'm coming home, Claire. I need to come home. I said, this is not your home anymore. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, very quietly, I know, but I have nowhere else to go. He arrived 17 days later. I had told my older 2 children he was coming. Sophia received this information with a stillness that told me she was processing something much larger than her expression showed. Ethan said nothing for a long moment, then asked practically whether he would be staying in the house. I told him I did not know yet. He nodded and went back to what he was doing. And I recognized in that nod the particular economy of young men who have learned not to spend emotional energy on things they cannot control. I had told Lily only that her father was coming to visit. I watched her face go through something fast and complicated, excitement and uncertainty moving through it like weather, and then settle into a careful hopefulness that broke my heart quietly, in the way things break your heart when you can see what is coming and cannot prevent it. He looked smaller than I remembered. I know that sounds impossible. A person cannot literally become smaller. But there is a version of a man that exists in the memory, constructed from years of significance, from the weight he occupied in your life. And when the physical person arrives and stands in front of you, the gap between that constructed version and the real one is visible. He had lost weight. His hair had changed. But more than anything, it was the way he stood, without the particular ease he had always carried, that unconscious confidence of a man who has never doubted that the room will adjust to his presence. He had been adjusted now by something, by life. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen, and he talked. He told me that things in California had fallen apart. He told me carefully, managing the information, that the relationship he had been in, he did not name Diana, I did not tell him that I already knew her name, had ended. He told me there had been financial difficulties. He told me he had felt, in the last year, profoundly alone. He said the word alone, with an emphasis that I think was meant to invite my sympathy. And I noticed the invitation, and I did not accept it. I let him speak. I did not interrupt. I had learned in 4 years of rebuilding my life that there is great power in letting someone say everything they have to say before you respond. It is not passivity. It is the opposite of passivity. It is the patience of a person who knows exactly what they think and is in no hurry to prove it. When he finished, I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, I know about Diana. What happened to his face in that moment is not something I can fully describe. It was not guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. It was something closer to the particular collapse that occurs in a person when the story they have been managing, the version of events they have constructed and maintained and presented, is suddenly revealed to be known. All the energy that went into managing that story has nowhere to go. It just falls. He started to speak. I held up my hand. I have known for 4 years, I said. She called me. She was a decent person, and she told me the truth. You might want to think about what it means that a woman you deceived treated me with more honesty than you did in 11 years of marriage. He did not have an answer for that. I had not expected him to. What followed over the next several days was not a confrontation exactly. It was something more complicated and more exhausting than a confrontation. It was a reckoning. Not dramatic, not loud, but thorough. He stayed in the house temporarily, sleeping in a separate room because he had genuinely nowhere else to go, and because my children deserved the chance to know him, even as I fully understood that the knowing would be complicated. I watched my children with him during those days. Sophia was polite and distant in a way that was more devastating than anger. The distance of someone who has closed a door and is not hostile, but will not reopen it simply because someone is knocking. Ethan watched him with the careful eyes of someone taking a measurement. And Lily, my youngest, Lily tried. She brought him coffee, she sat near him, she asked him questions about California with a genuine curiosity that was entirely her own. And I saw him watching her, understanding for the first time what it costs to miss a child's entire childhood. I saw it arrive in him, that understanding. It was not comfortable to witness. He asked me on the 4th evening whether there was any possibility of repairing things. I thought about how to answer honestly. I thought about the woman I had been 7 years ago, his hands holding my face at the moment of departure. I thought about the 1,000 nights of phone calls, of patience, of excuses made and questions swallowed. I thought about the kitchen at 2 in the morning with the weight of Diana's call still warm in my hands. I thought about my daughter putting her head on my shoulder in silent solidarity. I thought about the job I had found, the competence I had discovered, the life I had rebuilt piece by piece on the rubble of a marriage that had been demolished without my knowledge or consent. I thought about all of it, and then I answered him. On the evening, Marcus asked me whether there was any possibility of repairing things. I did not answer immediately. I told him I needed time. Not as a strategy, not as a way of keeping him uncertain or positioned at a disadvantage. I genuinely needed time because what he was asking me to consider was not a simple question, and I refused to treat it as one. I had spent too many years accepting the simplified version of things. I was not going to do that again. He stayed in the house for 3 weeks while I thought. Those 3 weeks were in some ways the strangest of my life. We existed in the same space with a carefulness that was almost formal. Polite, functional, each of us aware of the other's presence in a way that was nothing like the ease of a real marriage and nothing like the open hostility of a destroyed one. Somewhere in between, a temporary country with no name. He cooked sometimes. He had gotten better at cooking in California, which was not something I had expected, and watching him move around the kitchen that had been mine alone for 7 years was disorienting in a way I could not entirely explain. He was useful without being intrusive. He fixed things around the house that had needed fixing, small things, practical things, the kind of repairs that accumulate when there is only one adult managing everything. He did not do these things and then announce them. He simply did them. I noticed and said nothing, and added the noticing to the larger account I was keeping in my mind. He spent time with the children individually, which I had not instructed him to do and had not expected. He seemed to understand without being told that whatever relationship he might rebuild with them would have to be constructed one careful conversation at a time, without pressure, without the assumption of a closeness that had not been earned. With Lily, this came most naturally. She had no old wounds with him, only the wound of his general absence, and her openness to him was something he received with a humility that was new. With Ethan, it was harder. They went for a walk together on the 2nd week, and Ethan returned looking quieter than usual. And when I asked later how it had gone, he said simply, he apologized. And then, after a pause, I don't know yet what I'm going to do with that. That answer was so exactly right that I wanted to embrace him for it. That is precisely the correct response to an apology that carries real weight. You do not have to know immediately what to do with it. You are allowed to hold it and examine it and decide in your own time what it is worth. With Sophia, there was no walk, no single conversation I was aware of. There were small interactions, a shared meal, a moment in the living room when I heard them speaking in low voices about something I did not try to overhear. She remained throughout the most self-possessed of the 3. She was courteous to him in the way you are courteous to someone you have decided to neither close yourself to entirely nor open yourself to carelessly. The courtesy of a person waiting for evidence. I spoke to my mother Margaret during this time. Margaret is a woman of great practical intelligence and limited patience for elaboration. She has always communicated in the compressed language of someone who has lived long enough to know which details matter and which are decoration. When I told her the full truth, all of it, including Diana, including the years of knowledge I had carried alone. She was quiet for longer than I expected. Then she said, "What do you want, Claire? Not what should you do, not what does tradition say, or what will people think, or what is the right thing. Simply, what do you want?" I realized, sitting with that question, that almost no one had ever asked me that. Not in those words, in that direct way, with that particular expectation of a real answer. I had been asked what I needed, what the children needed, what the situation required. But what I wanted, the specific interior experience of desire, of personal preference, of Claire as a person with her own vision of her own life, that had been for most of my adult existence a secondary consideration at best. I told my mother I did not know yet. She said, "Then find out. Before you decide anything about him, find out what you actually want, not what you are supposed to want, not what is forgivable or unforgivable. What do you want your life to look like?" I carried that question with me for the remaining days of those 3 weeks. I carried it the way you carry something that keeps shifting shape. Sometimes it felt answerable, and I would begin to approach an answer, and then it would change form again, and I would have to begin again from a different direction. On the last day of the 3rd week, I sat down with Marcus and I told him what I had decided. I told him that I did not want to rebuild the marriage as it had been. I was not interested in reconstructing the specific structure we had inhabited before he left, because that structure had proven, under any real pressure, to be something neither of us had fully understood. I did not want to return to being the woman who waited. I did not want to return to the arrangement, and yes, I used that word deliberately, watching his face receive it, where my life was organized around his absence and his presence equally, where I had no authority of my own, where patience was the highest virtue available to me. I told him that if there was any possibility of something between us, not a return, not a restoration, but something genuinely new, it would have to be built on entirely different terms. Terms where I was a full participant in every decision. Terms where my work, my income, my presence in the world outside our home was not a temporary measure to be retired once he was stable again, but a permanent part of who I was. Terms where our children's relationship with him was real and earned, not assumed by virtue of biology. I told him these things without anger. I had moved past the anger. Not because I had forgiven everything, I had not, but because anger requires a kind of energy that I had stopped spending on him and started spending on myself, and I was not interested in taking it back. He listened. He did not interrupt. He had learned, somewhere in the wreckage of the previous years, to listen in a way he had not listened before. When I finished, he said, "I understand if those terms mean you want me to leave." I said, "I haven't finished." I told him that I had also thought about something else during those 3 weeks. I had thought about what it means to make a decision about a person based on the worst thing they have done. I had thought about whether the sum of a human being is located in their most significant failure, and whether I believed that, and when I examined it honestly, I found that I did not believe it completely. I did not believe it about anyone else I loved. I had extended to my children, to my mother, to my friends, the understanding that people are more than their worst moments. I had to be honest about whether I was willing to apply that understanding here, or whether what Marcus had done placed him outside the category of people to whom it could apply. I had thought about my children not as a reason to make a decision I did not want. I was finished making decisions for the sake of appearance or expectation, but as people whose lives would be shaped by what happened next, and who deserved a father if a father was available to them in any real form, the key word being real. And I had thought about myself, about the 43 years of my life, the 7 years of waiting, the 4 years of rebuilding. I had thought about the woman I had become, not despite everything that had happened, but genuinely through it, in ways I would not have chosen, but could not now undo. And I had thought about what that woman wanted her next chapter to look like. I told Marcus that I was not prepared to make a permanent decision in 3 weeks, that the question of whether there was anything salvageable between us was not one I could answer yet. But I told him that I was willing, carefully, slowly, without any assumption of where it led, to find out. Not for him, not even for the children, for myself, because I had earned the right to know. What followed over the next year was the most honest period of my marriage. Strange to say that the most honest period came after the betrayal, after the return, after everything that should have made honesty impossible. But it was true. The pretenses were gone. There was nothing left to perform. We had both seen the worst of what the other version of our marriage contained, and we were both too tired and too changed to rebuild the performance. What remained had to be real, or it could not remain at all. There were very difficult conversations I had never had in 11 years of marriage. Conversations about what we each had needed and had never said, about what we had each assumed and had never confirmed, about the specific ways we had failed to truly see each other even before he left. These conversations were not comfortable. Sometimes they ended badly. Sometimes I went to bed afterward feeling more uncertain than I had before we started. But they were real, and I had come to value real above almost everything else. Marcus found work locally. Not impressive work, modest work. Work that required him to be present and consistent in ways that were new for him. He was not the primary financial support of the household anymore. I was, and the adjustment that required in him was visible and sometimes graceless, but it was genuine. He had to learn to exist in a structure where he was not the center, where decisions were made together or not at all, where his presence was welcome but not assumed to be sufficient on its own. He was not always successful at this. There were moments of reversion, moments where the old confidence surfaced, the old assumption that the room would adjust to him. In those moments, I was no longer the woman who adjusted. I said so, clearly and without drama, and watched what he did with that information. Mostly he heard it, sometimes more than once before it took hold, but he heard it. I cannot give you a clean ending, and I will not pretend otherwise. I can tell you that Sophia, now 23, is building her own life with the particular combination of independence and warmth that I hope to raise in her. She has a complicated relationship with her father, not estranged, not close, but honest. They speak. There is the beginning of something there, something careful and incremental. I think in time it may become more. I do not push it in either direction. I can tell you that Ethan, at 20, has become someone I deeply admire. He carries his father's return the way he carried his father's absence, with a seriousness that does not collapse into either bitterness or false forgiveness. He has accepted the apology. He has not yet decided entirely what to do with it. I respect that completely. I can tell you that Lily at 17 has the most fluid relationship with her father of the three, because she had the least to lose and the most to discover. She asked him once directly, with the uncomplicated boldness of a teenager, why he had stayed away so long. He answered her honestly. "I don't know everything," he said. She came to find me afterward and sat with me in the kitchen for a while without saying anything. And eventually she said, "He was very sad when he was explaining it." And I said, "Yes, I think he was." And she nodded, and that seemed to be enough for her for now. I want to speak at the end to any woman who is reading this from inside of what I lived. I want to say this carefully because I am aware that my story is not every story, and my choices are not the only choices. If you are waiting, stop waiting as a virtue. Stop treating your patience as the highest contribution you can make to your own life. Your patience is real and it matters, but it is not the same thing as wisdom, and it is not the same thing as love. And it does not obligate the universe or the person you are waiting for to reward you with what you deserve. Find out what you want. This sounds simple. It is not simple at all, especially if you have spent years in a structure where what you want was considered secondary to what was needed. But do it anyway. Ask yourself in the quietest part of whatever night belongs to you, what do I actually want my life to look like? And then listen to the answer without immediately explaining to yourself why it is not possible. It may be more possible than you have been told. And if you are sitting right now holding a phone in your hands, waiting for a call, or having just ended one, or having just received a message that has changed the shape of everything, I want you to know something. You are not the sum of what was done to you. You are not the years you spent waiting, or the patience you gave that was not returned, or the love that was received without honesty. Those things happen to you. They are not you. You are what you do next. And what you do next, what you choose, how you rebuild, what you decide to keep, and what you finally, with full knowledge and full authority, choose to let go, that is yours entirely. No one can take it from you. No one can manage it or minimize it or describe it to someone else as an arrangement. It is your life. And you are even now only somewhere in the middle of it. My name is Claire. I am 43 years old. I am the mother of 3 people I am enormously proud of. I work, I have opinions, I make decisions. I have a life that belongs to me in a way it never fully did before. Not because everything was taken from me, but because losing it taught me finally how to hold it. And some mornings, I sit in my kitchen with a cup of coffee in the early quiet before the house wakes, and I think about the woman who used to sit in this same kitchen at 2 a.m, holding a phone, keeping everyone's secrets, waiting for something that was not coming. I want to tell her that she was enough, that she was always enough. She just needed time to find out.